faithfulness. I read about faithfulness as being a permanent, steadfast, lifelong, and deep, ongoing commitment to one thing in spite of circumstances, in spite of the way that the world changes around us. And so I wanted to find something that would contrast with that as an illustration of how sometimes as human beings we like the latest thing and we jump on it for a few moments, but then as soon as something new comes along, we switch over to that. And in many ways, we are not faithful creatures. And the first thing I thought of was the phenomenon of twitting or twittering. And I'm sure that you are all twittering, probably right now, twittering your friends saying, well, here I am sitting in church, listening to another boring sermon. That's very nice. In case you don't know, twittering is a free social network that allows people to send out very short messages, only up to 140 characters, but it's a way of communicating small amounts of information to a large group of people very, very quickly. And when you send one of those messages, it's called a tweet. And it was invented in 2006, and right now there are approximately 6 million people who tweet on a regular basis. So it's a strange and beautiful thing, and we hear about it in the news all the time, how it's being used. Now, before I go on, I don't want anyone to think that I have an aversion to technology, or that I hate all technology, or think it's all bad. I have to admit I have some difficulties with technology, particularly in the way in which technology changes so fast that as soon as you get used to one thing, the next thing comes along and you have to readjust your mind. I think I still have some lingering bitterness from my youth when people were trying to figure out whether cassettes or 8-tracks were going to be the dominant source of music. And I went to Radio Shack and I said, look, which way is it going to go? And the guy in Radio Shack says, well, 8-track is the way to go. So there, I was 16 years old, I took all my money, bought an 8-track player for my car and for my house, and invested in 8-tracks. And of course, 2 weeks later, it was really obvious that the 8-track was dead. So I try to get over my bitterness about that and give technology a bit of a fair shake. And in fairness to twittering, it has done some really good things, and it does make good things possible. For example, when U.S. Airlines Flight 1549 landed on the Hudson River in January of this year, the first person who was able to send footage of that to a news source was a person who had captured the crash landing on their cell phone and had used TwitPics to send that video to a news station. In April of this year, when there were anti-communist protests in Moldavia, again it was people twittering who were able to get that news out to news sources before anyone else. Likewise, in May of this year, when there were protests over corruption in the election in Iran, it was people sending tweets who were the source of the news stories that all of us heard. And of course, right now, even as we speak, there is a major movement amongst people who are tweeting and twittering in order to defend President Barack Obama's movement towards universal health care in the United States of America. So it's not all bad. It's good. It does good things. But I want to caution you today that if you give in to the mentality of tweeting and twittering, you might be giving in to something that's really very temporary, and we need to find things in our lives that are not temporary, but permanent, deep, and substantial. Twittering, in a sense, is the opposite of faithfulness. I chose the story of faithfulness from Scripture today, the story of Gideon, who stuck with the thing that he knew was right and solid, even when his whole town and his whole nation had gone in a different direction. But there's 1,000 stories in Scripture of faithfulness, long-lasting, lifelong, steadfast devotion to what is right and good and true. Here's the difficulty with Twitter. Number one, the brevity of it. The most that you could ever send in a tweet is 140 characters. And that may be good for some things, but we know that to convey the really deep truths of life, you can't do it with 140 characters. It takes a lifelong commitment to teach our children, to share with our friends, to tell the world about the love of God is a powerful and deep thing, and you can't convey messages like that with 140 characters. And if we give in too much to the Twittering mentality, we might risk producing a generation whose attention span is 140 characters long.